Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. You know, this is the first thing, Casey, where we would have disagreed. I wanted lunch to be a light salad and a jog around the green outside City Hall, not a glass of red wine. So I know there is no tradition in Korea of having a siesta after lunch, and I don't want you to start now. Okay, so we're not having a... Now, my panel session, and we will take the next hour on this panel till 3:10, if that's okay. We're determined to keep you awake during the next hour. So we'll be watching. Anybody sort of starts to nod off, we'll be asking you questions. So pay attention. Now, we're going to be dealing with a very important topic this afternoon, green growth. And we've got two great speakers. Let me introduce them to you now. On my immediate right, Jim Elliott. Jim's from Samsung Electronics. He's the Vice President of the Samsung Semiconductor, Inc. Jim's educated and lives in California, and he's a regular keynote speaker at industry events in the US and indeed worldwide. So we're very lucky to have Jim with us. And then my other panelist is Kim Young-jin, also from part of the Samsung Group, Samsung SDS. Now, Dr. Kim is an expert in strategic and process consulting. He's actually planned and managed various sustainability businesses, set them up and managed them. And he's got a background, which I think is very important, as a certified professional engineer on factory management, so brings a particularly interesting perspective to our discussions this afternoon. Now, I'm going to get the proceedings going with a bit of background about growth. What does green growth mean? Can we deal with growth and climate change? And I have a few slides to help me do that, which I hope I'm going to get up now. Just bear with us. I hope they'll be here. Well, you know, I could, here we go. I was going to say I could have started talking without this particular visual aid, couldn't I? Do you know, ladies and gentlemen, the average growth rate in China for the last 3 decades has been 8% per annum. And although that might not be as impressive as the ICT growth here in Korea, for an economy, that is incredibly impressive. If my maths are right, that translates into a 40-fold increase in economic output over those 30 years. And of course, the consequence of that is that millions of people in China now no longer live in poverty. Another consequence of that is now that China is the largest emitter of greenhouse gases on the planet. Now, when we get into this discussion about climate change and carbon emissions and so on, I think it's worth just having in mind what the economists and scientists think of as the 5 steps that link our activity with climate change, and it's just worth taking you through what those, what the 5 steps are. So it's people's activity, economic activity. That leads to the production of greenhouse gases, mostly carbon dioxide, but not exclusively. That leads to a build-up of those greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, what are referred to as the stocks of greenhouse gases, which in turn leads to climate change, typically temperature rising, which in turn has an impact on our world and on our lives. Now, there are many uncertainties in that chain, those 5 steps between people's activities and the impact on our lives. And as you know, a number of people are what you might call deniers of that. They don't believe that link exists. But it's interesting, this is not a new science. You know, the first scientific analysis of possible climate change occurred almost 200 years ago. It was typically a French mathematician, a guy called Joseph Fourier, who first did he first wondered why the world wasn't as warm as he calculated it should have been. And he then postulated it was because of the buildup of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And so almost 200 years ago. So thinking about that chain of those 5 things linking together, what I want us to explore in this panel in the next hour is, can we really grow and tackle climate change at the same time? And of course, to make it relevant to us as an audience, I want to look at the implications and the role of ICT in that debate. So can we grow, can we tackle climate change, and what role do we have in an industry in that debate? I just like this slide. I mean, if we don't pay attention, we just keep on growing. Is this the result? Oh, what was that? That was the Earth. So are we doomed just to roll over our planet as we motor on by? Let's hope not. Eh? So why am I qualified to talk to you about this? I'm just going to. I think I've got lost. Yeah, why am I qualified to talk to you about this subject? Well, personally, I'm not really, but in the role of leading our association's work in this, we have done some work. So we have got some, as an association, we do have some pedigree. I mean, if you think about, as I said to you, the first scientific analysis being 200 years ago, we as an association, and in fact, frankly, we as an industry, are what we would call in the UK, Johnny come lately. I think that will translate for you. We're very late at this party. We're really only in the last few years that our industry has engaged in this. I spoke on this topic, I think 2.5 years ago, at our WITSA Global Public Policy Summit in Cairo. And the minister was introducing the agenda, and he said, well, today we're going to talk about internet governance, and we're going to talk about broadband, we're going to talk about spectrum. Oh, and we also have this novel topic of climate change on the agenda. We've never talked about that before, and that was only 2.5 years ago when it really became very visible on the sort of IT policy agenda. For us, how did it start? It started because people started to talk about the impact our industry was having on the climate. They talked about the incredible energy consumption of these big flat screen televisions that were appearing on the scene. And we talked to other industries who had perhaps been receiving criticism for the contribution that they were making to climate change, particularly the airline industry. And their advice to us was, well, in the airline industry, we thought we'd just put our heads down for a bit and it would go away, and that turned out not to be the case. So we advise you as the tech industry to get on the front foot on this subject and get involved. And so early in 2008, which is not very long ago, we produced this report, High Tech, Low Carbon. And it deals with 2 things. It deals with what our industry is doing to reduce its own carbon footprint and its impact on the environment. And it's a good story to tell. And I think you will hear some things from our other speakers this afternoon about that story. I think we're doing a good job. And there's more that we could do, but we're doing a good job as an industry. But we also moved on in this report to look at what does our industry do to help other sectors of the economy reduce their carbon footprint. So what I'm going to cover in, just in my few minutes is a bit of background to the climate change debate, what I think the actions are that are needed, a particular comment on our progress, and some ideas for improvement. So you know where you are. I've got 3 slides really that are on the background. Now this is an interesting discovery I made relatively recently. There's a professor of environmental studies at the University of Colorado called Professor Roger Pielka. And in fact, his father was also an eminent climate change scientist. So he's not a denier, as I said to you earlier. He really does believe that there is a human impact. I talked about those 5 steps, that human impact can be demonstrated. He really does believe it. In fact, he thinks it's probably understated. But he also has invented what he calls the iron law of climate politics. And I think we should understand this law. What he argues is that if policies of emissions reduction come up against policies of economic growth, the emissions reduction policies lose out every time, and the economic growth policies win out. He says this is the iron law, and unless we confront this iron law, we will go on believing that simply espousing targets for greenhouse gas reduction will be just that. They will be targets, but they won't be achieved. Now, I'm sure many of us, when we look at the progress that has been made, would think, well, that sort of stacks up. I can believe that.